Welcome to Ask GCN, this week with an exciting new segment, which you will see later on. First, let's crack on with some questions from you guys. First question is from AP, #talkback, which is an important hashtag to include when sending us questions. Question is everyone with an FTP of 6 watts per kilo able to race as a pro? Is that a number that all the pros have, from domestiques to GC contenders? Well, in a short answer, no. So FTP varies probably quite a lot between pros, and it depends what they're good at. So, for example, people who are good at very long climbs probably have quite a high FTP, and some of the sprinters might actually have a relatively low FTP, although still higher than me or most other people. The important thing to notice here is that FTP is a very rough measure of what you're good at on a bike, and when it comes to racing, an FTP is important for long, steady efforts, but all it does is measure how much power you can put out for an hour divided by your weight. So it's useful for measuring efforts of an hour, but not useful for predicting how good you'll be at sprinting, attacking, short bursts of effort to get on a wheel or attack on a climb. All those things are much more important in racing than how much steady power you can put out for an hour. So I would say that the climbers who are good at long climbs and the time trialists, they'll have a very high FTP. Some other pros, possibly not. And as I say, there'll be a big variation. We have a very interesting video, which you can watch here, which is Cy with Louis Passfield explaining why FTP isn't actually everything about cycling performance. Another thing to note about pro racing is that, of course, your tactics and how clever you are at racing is actually a lot more important than your physical ability. Obviously, at the top end, physical ability and your physiology is extremely important, but how good you are at hiding in the bunch, how smart you are about when to use energy, that's often, I think, personally, more important than your physical ability.
Functional threshold power is the theoretical maximum power that you could sustain for 1 hour. And it's pretty much the gold standard of measuring someone's ability on a bike. Except that all it really does is tell you how much power you can sustain for 1 hour. And admittedly, when you know your weight, you can work out your power to weight ratio, and therefore you can calculate how fast you can climb hills of 1 hour. And if you know how much aerodynamic drag you can create, you can also work out how fast you could ride on the flat for 1 hour.
The next question comes in from Stuart, who says, "Hi gang, I have a question about rocking the bike when climbing out of the saddle. I'm by no means an experienced climber, but I try to keep the bike still when I stand up. Rocking seems like it would be inefficient. Sprinters obviously rock the bike too, but in my sense they're mashing, so it's unavoidable. I know it looks pro, but what are the other reasons for doing it when climbing?" Well, Stuart, in my opinion, it is actually efficient to rock the bike. So think about it, when you're out of the saddle, you have to move your body relative to the bike. And if you're keeping the bike still, that means you're rocking your body, which is actually less efficient than rocking your bike, because unless you are extremely light and your bike is extremely heavy, your bike is going to be lighter than you in almost every situation, unless you've got a lot of luggage on it and you're touring. And that means that it's actually more efficient to move the bike. This is something that my very first cycling coach told me years ago when I was learning to climb. He said, Emma, you should move the bike and keep your body still when you're out of the saddle. And that's the way I've done it ever since. And I personally am a big believer. And actually, we have a video about riding out the saddle where I do go on about this quite a lot. So you can watch it by clicking right here.
Right, now to what I think is the key aspect of technique for riding out of the saddle. You should sway the bike and not swing your body. That's because even if you don't own an amazingly light superbike, your bike will weigh less than you. I mean, maybe not if you're touring with a lot of luggage, but apart from that, your bike will be lighter. It's simply more efficient to move the bike than your body weight.
Right, the next question is about nutrition, and it comes in from Barb303, and they ask, nutrition question, glucose and fructose combo, does it really work as 2 energy channels for the double the power results? Is it backed up by science? If so, please give some practical examples on the sources of these. Thanks. Well, yes, it is backed up by science. So fructose and glucose are absorbed on slightly different energy channels. Not being a nutritionist, my terminology might not be quite right, but basically, if you combine glucose and fructose in the gels or the sports drink you're using, you can actually absorb slightly more than with just glucose or just fructose, and hopefully avoid tummy upsets. And that is definitely backed up by science. And actually, we have a video where we interviewed Asker Jukendrup about race nutrition, event nutrition, and you can watch it by clicking here, and he explains.
I think for me, the starting point is always understanding the sport itself.
Yeah.
What is it that determines performance in that sport? So I think it's almost going back to basics.
Yeah.
Like, what is it in this particular sport that determines performance? And in cycling, for example, that's going to be different of course, in mountain stages than it is in time trials. And
Yeah.
so it really depends, but you have to go back to that basic. Once you have a good understanding of that, I think the question to ask is, okay, now with your training, what are you trying to achieve? What are your main goals?
Yep.
So that for me is the next step.
Well, now it's time for our new segment, which is Ask GCN Training in partnership with Zwift. Now, in this segment, we choose one of your questions about training and try to answer it in a little more depth. And the lucky questioner gets 3 months free subscription to Zwift, which is pretty awesome. So send in your questions for this segment using the hashtag AskGCNTraining in all the usual channels. Today's question comes in from Anders, who asks, "Hi, I'm currently new to training on a bike and at rock bottom on Strava. Since I'm fairly untrained, then of course I signed myself up to a race, 170 kilometers next summer. That is a big race. Anyway, he asks, how should I plan such a long time ahead, 48 weeks, given that there is a lot of rain in the autumn and spring and slush together with ice covering the roads in winter?" Well, thanks from Anders. Well, now that is a great question. And I have to say that despite all my years of training, I am not actually a qualified coach. So I talked to a coach at Zwift about this to make sure that I didn't give any misinformation. And there's quite a lot one could say, because basically, Anders, you have asked for a year's training plan, which is a big question. But firstly, I'd like to say that it is fantastic to see you taking on such a big challenge. A 170 kilometre race is no small deal, but it's totally doable within 48 weeks, because that's almost a year's training. So great to see. It would be helpful, I suppose, to know a little bit more about the specifics of the race you've taken on. So whether it's hilly, flat, windy, the weather conditions, for example. But I'm sure you're smart enough to work out that you need to train for that specifically, but we'll come into that later. So you mentioned that the weather is pretty bad where you live at some times of the year. So that's worth taking into account when planning your training. So let's talk about the actual training itself. It's worth dividing into 5 generic blocks. The first one being endurance, the second one being unstructured intensity, the next block being structured intensity to work on your weaknesses, the next block to be course-specific training, and the final block is a taper and freshener. So to summarise what those blocks should contain. The endurance block is the first 8 to 10 weeks, and it's about achieving consistent volume. Now, since you're new to cycling, basically any consistent cycling you do will improve your fitness. So you want to aim for a minimum of 6 hours a week, but if you can up it to 10 or 12 consistently, that's good. That should last 8 to 10 weeks. The next period of training, 8 to 10 weeks, you want to try and introduce some intensity. And since it'll be autumn where you live then, and the weather's not going to be so good, you could do this by doing a Zwift race once a week. They're great fun, they're definitely very intense, and it will help you to work out where your weaknesses are. So you'll find out from those races whether you're weaker or stronger on short climbs, long climbs, flat, and that'll help you to plan the next block of training, which is 12 weeks, where you should try to work on those weaknesses by using quite specific interval training 2 to 3 times a week. And again, Zwift has some amazing interval training sessions that you could do. I know, I've used them and they're really hard, but really useful. The next 10 to 12 weeks, you want to be including some longer rides at least once a week, because that 170k is a long way. And you also want to think about training specifically for the course. So thinking about the weather conditions and the terrain, and also thinking about your nutrition. So you want to be practicing eating what you want to eat in the race and seeing if you get any tummy problems, because that's one thing that can really upset a lot of people on race day. The last phase is just a taper, so you want to stay healthy and well rested. You still want to keep some intensity, so once to twice a week an intense effort, but make sure you've got plenty of days to recover between those efforts so you feel fresh and ready to go. Some other things to note, which is that obviously you need to include recovery throughout the whole training year. So you need recovery weeks and you need recovery days, because you don't actually get faster through the training. That provides a stress on your body. And when you get stronger and fitter is actually in the recovery from that stress. So bear that in mind. And also think about your bike fit. So if you're new to cycling and you've got a new bike, make sure you're happy on it. If you start getting niggles like pain in your knees, your back, your shoulders, for example, think about making sure that your bike fits you. You could even get a proper bike fit. I hope that's helpful, and good luck in your event, basically. Right, now it's time for the quick fire round. CMAD asks, if hills recruit different muscles than the flats, will that mean that I have a slightly different FTP on hills versus the flats? Well, yes, it could well do. Not because you recruit different muscles, but because you recruit them differently. So I always found that I had a higher sustainable power uphill than on the flat, and I used to think that was just because I was lazy on the flat, but actually it's because you pedal differently. Same muscles, different way of using them. Basically you have much higher inertial load on a climb because you don't have as much kinetic energy, you're moving slower, and there's a component of gravity acting against you, so you don't keep rolling at a high speed, which means that you exert power around more of the pedal stroke. That means that on the flat you have less time during the pedal stroke to exert power, and it's basically more of a fast twitch muscle usage. I know that because I looked it up for some research that the AIS, the Australian Institute of Sport, did. So yes, it can mean that you have a different FTP on the climbs than on the flat, and actually some people have a better FTP on the flat than on a climb. It just depends what kind of rider you are, and you can train it, obviously. Next question is from Tom Bayer, who says, I want to buy new deeper section rims. I want 38mm and 50mm front and rear. Is that too deep for my body weight? I weigh 57 kilos. Will I get blown around? Thanks. Well, it's a very personal thing because it depends on how confident you are on your bike, but I reckon that's fine. I'm about 50 kilos and I've used to race on a bike with a 35 at the front and 45 at the back, so it's not that different. You weigh a little bit more. I think you'll probably be okay. But maybe, if you can, borrow some wheels to try it out first. Then Joost van der Hoogt asks, what is the hardest climb that you ever did? Greets from Holland. Well, it wasn't in Holland, that's for sure. So that's quite a personal question, and I guess the question is that hardest climb or hardest experience on a climb? Probably my hardest experience on a climb would have been racing the Giro Rosa back in the day on the Stelvio when I didn't win. Just because I gave it everything and didn't win, which is a bit annoying. But in terms of the actual hardest climb itself, I think probably the Angliru, which is quite a new one for me. So there you go. Then we have a question from Rasmus Riemann, who asks, I'm about to get, or actually build myself, a much lighter bike going from a steel bike with racks and mudguards to everything carbon bike that will weigh about half as much. Should I stay with the same gearing, or will that lost weight mean that I won't need the lowest gears anymore? Well, I think that depends on the ratio of your weight to your bike's weight. So if you're quite a heavy chap, then your bike's weight, even though it is a lot lighter, won't massively affect your total weight of you and the bike. If you're pretty light, then it will make a big difference, and you probably won't need your smallest gear. But I've never heard anyone complain that they had too small a gear that they didn't use. So I would go on the safe side and probably keep the same gearing, and if you find you don't need that big sprocket at the back, then you can always change the cassette. So this question is, what are the pros and cons of putting sealant into inner tubes for added puncture resistance? Does it actually work? Well, the answer is yes and no. Does it work? So sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. It can be useful in the times it does work. It adds, in terms of penalty, about 50 grams per wheel, and it's in quite a bad place because that weight is obviously distributed around the tyre furthest away from the hub. I used to race with sealant in my tubs to add extra puncture resistance, and I think it worked quite often. You could tell when it had worked because there'd be little splodges of sealant where there had been nicks in the tyre where the sealant had clearly closed the gap. However, one time it really didn't work. I got a puncture at the worst point in the race. Actually, I got a double puncture when I hit a pothole, and I spent the whole race chasing back on and never made the front group again. So it doesn't always work. Sometimes it does. Try it. Right, the next question comes in from Simchi Rubenstein, who asks, are there any good tips you could give for a turbo trainer beginner? How long should intervals be? What are the different types of training you can do? Well, they're almost infinite, Simchi. There are loads and loads of different sessions. And in fact, we have loads of good training sessions as GCN videos that you could watch. But I think that where you should start is how to start out with training generally. And we have a great new video from Chris here, which is his first video in his series of Get Fit Quick, where he starts with the real basics of setting up your training. So why not watch that? Now, before you even get started with training, too early, mate, too early. You need to think about setting yourself some clear goals. So write them down and remind yourself daily of what you're aiming towards.
People who set goals are proven more likely to achieve their objectives. You should set goals that adhere to the following principles. They should be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound.
Smart goals. Nice.
Yeah.
Thanks for all your fantastic questions. You can send more in to us with the hashtag talkback, or of course for the training specific Zwift questions, you can send them in with the hashtag Ask GCN Training. Give us a thumbs up, and you might like to check out this video that came out last weekend, which is me training on a buffalo bike. So to find out why, click down here.